Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, some 22 years after first starting work on the question of evolution, or transmutation of species as he called it, thus delaying one of the most important books of the 19th century. Why did he delay? Some people say it was his perfectionism, that he wanted incontrovertible evidence of his theory before going to the press. Evolution was, after all, an unfavorable position, made worse by an earlier book called Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation by Robert Chambers, which also proposed evolution, but did so on the basis of some of the sloppiest science imaginable. Ever after, any mention of evolution seemed to lump the speaker into the same category as that thoroughly discredited work. Darwin also possibly delayed due to his ill health. 5 years aboard a small wooden ship destroyed his constitution, and he rarely had times of good health. Work was often a struggle. However, one of the most likely reasons for his delay was that he understood that there would be serious ramifications, especially theologically, for his friends, his family, and for the wider world. In this lecture, I will outline 3 of the major theological challenges that were presented by Darwin's theory of evolution. The first is the question of suffering in nature. If God created through evolution, it means God created through a method that relies on suffering, on violent competition, on death and extinction of countless animals. The second challenge is the question of the fall. If humans evolved in populations, what do we do with questions like Adam and Eve, original sin, people being made in the image of God, and other related doctrines? Finally, we'll move into questions of divine action in evolution. We're going to ask how God is active in the world and where we might expect God to be seen. Now, before we jump into the first challenge, I would like to begin by asking you to help me test a hypothesis I have. I want you to think of the most vivid memory you have of the natural world. Just think about it for a moment. And perhaps you want to leave a comment on the discussion board, but I only want one single word. Was the memory that you thought of something positive or something negative? Was it a vision of the glory of nature or of its threat? When I do this, I think of climbing a mountain in Canada and watching the sun set while the stars crept out one by one like so many Silmarils adorning the heavens. So it's a very, very positive image. And from my experience with live audiences, where I can see people's hands raised, whether it's positive or negative, the result is overwhelmingly that people tend to remember the positive. It's very rarely that I have somebody say, my most vivid view of nature was something really negative. And we quite naturally think of beauty and order in nature, of the exquisite balance of ecosystems, and the overwhelming majesty we often experience. And we're not alone in being amazed at such things. In 1802, William Paley published his famous book, Natural Theology. And in it, he set out many of the instances of nature that fill us with wonder, and he attributed them to the care and attention of a loving God. He concludes like this. He says, "It is a happy world, after all. The air, the earth, the water teem with delighted existence. In a spring noon or a summer evening, on whichever side I turn my eyes, myriads of happy beings crowd upon my view." 57 years later, Charles Darwin proposed a radical new idea for how life developed. Instead of a comfortable, well-designed world where everything was specially designed for its purpose and for its place, Darwin proposed a world full of conflict in a cutthroat race for survival. The war of nature, he called it. The happy theological systems developed by those like Paley were shattered. Creatures were not placed in happy and abundant habitats. They eked out a living through hundreds of millions of years of predation, parasitism, and extinction. Suffering and death chiseled out those forms that we admire. And theologians were left with urgent new questions. How could a God of love create through such a violent, competitive, and death-filled process of evolution?